One of the things I've tried to stress in this typewriter series is I've been trying to work toward an aesthetic of the social aspects of typing, social aspects of typewriters and how they might fit into what we might call a typewriter lifestyle. And not only about the technical aspects of typewriters. And part of that typewriter lifestyle, I feel, it's important that we develop relationships with other like-minded typewriter aficionados. And I've been fortunate enough to find a fellow typewriter nerd in my hometown, Kevin Kittle. And we have been meeting on a regular basis, and last night we got together with our spouses and had a great time, had dinner. I brought along a video camera and I brought a typewriter, and we had a great time. In these discussions that we've been having over the last few weeks, we talked about forming a little society, what we're calling the Albuqwerty Type Writer Society. It's right now just kind of an affectation, just to give a name to our little community of two people, but there is a possibility that we might actually be more serious about this, and we might actually start a little typewriter-based society here in Albuquerque, if for no other reason than to give a name to it. I know that some other communities in the United States have formed loosely affiliated typewriter organizations, like for instance the Typochondriacs. But last night we had a great time talking about all kinds of various subjects relating to typewriters, their history, their use, the philosophy of typewriters. And one of the things that we thought about that's very interesting is if you compare typewriters with antique cars with antique calculating machines. In the case of the antique cars and calculating machines, they are very similar to antique typewriters in their physical nature and the way they were manufactured and all the aspects of restoring antique mechanical devices. But the main difference, I think, between those and antique typewriters is with calculating devices, you essentially can only do arithmetic with them. With cars, the most you can do, other than collecting them and displaying them at shows, is drive them. But the magic of typewriters is you can write with them. And so what empowers typewriters with this special something, I believe, is the fact that they are tools for creativity. You can truly write with them. You can create imaginary worlds with a typewriter. And that's something you can't do with an antique car or an antique calculating device. I think that's one of the things that empowers typewriters and makes them so special. Well, I hope you enjoy this footage that I shot last night. Hey, this is Joe Van Cleve, and welcome to the secret compound in the North Rio Grande Valley of Albuquerque, where the Albuqwerty Type Writer Society meeting is happening right now. The typewriter conspiracy is well at hand, and we have a fellow conspirator, Kevin, and he has a few thoughts we've been discussing about the differences between portable typewriters and ultra portable typewriters.
Well, one of the things we've been thinking about is how do you define the difference between a portable and ultra portable? Some are self-apparent, such as the Hermes Baby, ultra portable, whereas a Smith Corona portable is obviously portable, but a Skywriter is ultra portable. Where is that defining line? That's what we always want to know. And so we were thinking about some of the things is that, do you go by its single two dimensions, length and width, or you go by its cubic volume, length, width, and height? Or is it the carrying dimensions when it's in the case? The folded Roy is obviously the smallest typewriter you can get when it's folded, but the Hermes Rocket is smaller when it's not in its case. So it makes an interesting question about what is an ultra portable and what's not. And what matters also is how are you going to use the typewriter? Is it better to carry a portable even though you're traveling, or is it better to carry an ultra portable? Depends on what you're going to write. Does your ultra portable handle postcards or stiff paper, or is it only handling regular size sheets of paper or regular flexible paper? Major questions. Well, my wife Andrea asked the ultimate question, or one of the ultimate questions: what typewriter would you take to a picnic? And one would think, obviously, an ultra portable. And you would want to have something that you could place on the ground and type in front of it, maybe lie down in front of it like you see the classic picnic writing something down and all that stuff. Or do you want to have something that you could put on your lap? But then you'd have to have a chair. So what would be the better typewriter to have at picnics? Folded legs and put it on it, like if you're in a lotus position or something like that and typing, and you get into this Zen mode of on a picnic. Or do you want to write something serious then? Like, you would think a person in a Zen mode would be writing something very philosophical or serious. Or do you want to highlight something lighthearted, like, it's a beautiful day or something like that. As you watch the boaters go by on the water, if you were in a place that had water, which we don't have in New Mexico.
Right.
So we would watch the Roadrunner go by in New Mexico.
Right. Watch the dust blow.
Watch the dust blow, exactly, something like that.
And watch the Virga fall, but never get rain.
You never get rain and all that stuff. And as you're sweating in the picnic and all that stuff, think, okay, I need to move into the shade. So then you move into the shade, and then, okay, so much better. And then how hot would the typewriter get if it were in the sun, If it's too hot on the keyboard.
Metal-bodied or plastic body?
Metal body, plastic body, it's right. How much heat, and stuff like that. And does that affect the type print and all that stuff? Or the skipping of the typewriter if it's working well? So what would be the typewriter you'd use on a picnic? Well, obviously the answer would be, okay, maybe a Roy, because it's so small.
Oh, yes.
It's easy to carry with. You can put it into that picnic basket, and you wouldn't even hardly notice that you brought a typewriter. And as Joe has discovered, that you can put that paper on the underside of it, and you can carry everything all together, which is wonderful. And all that. Or do you want something that's maybe just a little bit larger so that it's a little more comfortable, to type on or something like that at a picnic? And I guess it depends on how serious you want to type, If it's just quick little quips, then probably the Roy would be perfect. But if it's something more serious, do you want to get something maybe like, I don't know, a Skywriter? Would that be the right one, a Skywriter? And just fascinating questions, for us typewriter enthusiasts. Okay, one of the things that Kevin hasn't tried out yet on his Royal there is this rubber sheet, this 1/32 inch thick rubber backing sheet on his Royal. So let's try that out and see how he likes it. Okay, well, Joe said to take this, and it's just a little bit wider than an 11.5.
Leave the paper sticking up a little bit when you
okay,
feed
leave the paper sticking up a little bit.
So
Okay.
it'll grab the paper first.
Okay. So,
And you'll find the rubber sheet is a lot heavier than the paper, and it wants to flop around differently.
it does, yeah, I see that. So then we'll feed it in.
Now I left it 12 inches long, and I don't know if it needs to be shortened any.
You have to be careful and not wrap the rubber around. So you have to make sure it feeds.
And it wants to stick to its other side.
Yeah, it is kind of sticky. Because one thing we're talking about, both the Facet typewriter that Joe brought tonight and my Royal have good platens. This Royal was a Ames platen replaced 10 or so years ago from the original. This is the 1959 typewriter, and it's still in fabulous condition. And then the Facet typewriter that Joe brought is got a really nice platen, but it may be actually slightly softer than the Royal. And one thing you're noticing is that the Facet, when you type on it, that the type characters imprint deeper into the paper than on this Royal. And maybe just the typewriter, but it may have to do with platen. So now we're putting it into this rubber backing sheet that Joe has discovered to use with his Roy typewriter, because it has such a hard platen to soften and quiet the typewriter and make it more typable since the before he replaces the platen, if he's able to do that, because it's such a small platen. So it'd be interesting to see how this feels on the Royal, which we're going to do right now. So
it is quieter.
It does quiet it down. So just the feel on that, though, it doesn't make the typewriter feel a whole lot different. Maybe a little less snappier. But I do notice that the imprint of the letters is a little fuzzier, so it's not quite as crisp as with the original platen. The feel is pretty good, and it is quieter. Now, one thing we're noticing when we bring it through here is that, let's see, because of a softer backing, if it punches through the paper, and yes, it does feel like it's a little more punchy through the paper. So the softer backing, which is like putting a second piece of paper behind it, you actually end up with more imprint going through the backside of the paper than without that. So, first impression that the rubber backing or something like that is great when you have a really hard platen, but if you have a good platen already, it's probably something you wouldn't want to use. But if you're trying to compensate for a typewriter that has a hard platen that's over age, it's probably a really good solution for that, because it makes the typewriter usable.
So would it be fair to say that it's like a Starbucks, it's a Starbucks thing? Its purpose is mainly to mute the audio.
And that's a good point. It does mute the audio, so let's say you take in this, and the Roy is very loud to start with, even with a good platen. The Royal here, this is a Royal Heritage, is not quite as loud to start with, but if you were in a public setting and all that stuff and you wanted to not attract as much attention, or at least not annoy the patrons at Starbucks, then maybe this would be a good choice. So then you can do the classic typing, So when you want to fill your boxes with 5 dozen Scotch-filled liquor jugs, it's probably a good use for that. This is from the probably before 1925, because it's acoustically recorded. Midnight Fire Alarm. Another question that came up with is, how do you handle your drink glass, whether it may be water, or in this case, Scotch over here, or a cup of coffee with your carriage return? You come back from a break, and you come back and you sit down and you think, oh yeah, I've got to type something here. And then you stop and, oh my gosh, there goes the water glass, and all that stuff. Well, very simple. It's time, if it's time to do a carriage return, it's time to take a drink. And as we know, Scotch is not just for breakfast, so Scotch is for all the time. So under here, in between paragraphs or sentences, a little sip, you set it back down, and away you start typing. And you think, finish the sentence, put the quote, okay, finish that, type for another sip, go on to the next line. Wonderful thing. Of course, you can always use a glass that's a little shorter than your carriage and it fits perfectly.
That's probably the better solution.
Yes.
I was falling in love.
So the story of this Facet 1620 typewriter is, I went to a little thrift store on the east side of Albuquerque. It was one of these junky little thrift stores that all it has is clothes, old shoes, but in the very back of this store was what they call the electronics section, with just a bunch of junky little stuff like old VCRs that nobody wants to buy. But they had this plastic, beige, white plastic case, and in it was this Facet 1620 typewriter. I got it for $20, and it was one of the best typewriters I've ever found. And because I bought that typewriter there, I periodically go by that same thrift store again, never see any typewriters. This was a one-of-a-kind find. Just one of those things, the timing was right and I found it. Now Kevin has a story about his typewriter.
So what I did, I found this Royal Heritage. Goodwill in Albuquerque used to have a site they called the You Fix It Corral. And you'd walk in there with all kinds of bizarre electronic stuff and stuff like that. And I bought reel-to-reel tapes and all kinds of interesting stuff. And one day I saw this kind of at the end of an aisle, not quite in its case correctly, was this Royal Heritage. And I thought, oh, well, that's a cool looking typewriter. And I didn't have very many typewriters then. I had a couple, but I thought, wow, that would kind of replace my typewriter I had from graduation, which I didn't have anymore. And so I picked this up, and it was $10. And I thought, oh gosh, $10, that's a great deal, that's fine. And that was a number of years ago, so $10 was a little more than it is now. And then consequently, I took it to John Lewis and spent $90+, almost $100, having him service it, replace the platen and all that. Well worth the effort. He did the full cleaning, the classic revamping of the typewriter. So it was well worth it, and it's been a great typewriter ever since, you know. So there are some great deals out there if you look for it. Ah, it popped out. Look at that. The ribbon popped out of the vibrator.
It must have been some pretty risque words you were typing.
What time is it?
So we had this conversation just now about where typewriters are at in our culture as compared to antique cars. And I had this thought that I captured in a video a week or so ago, that the typewriter culture in America is kind of like the car culture in Cuba. There's no new manual typewriters being made, and there's only a finite number of them out there, and we have to somehow keep them working in spite of the fact that there's really no spare parts. We have to kind of make do with whatever, salvage them off of other machines to keep the fleet running. But we had this interesting thought about the way typewriters were built versus the way cars were built.
The thing about cars, they were built with the idea that, okay, you're going to get a new model every 3-5 years or whatever it might be. Even in the 40s and the 50s, you were going to get the new one. And cars were under a harsher environment than typewriters, so they did wear out faster. And typewriters, when they built them, I think they thought because they were mechanical that, okay, we need to build these really well because they are going to wear, they're mechanical parts. But then they turned out building them so well overall that they didn't wear out as fast, which is kind of astonishing when you think about it. And that's one reason why typewriters from the 30s, 40s, 50s last so well, and so many examples are still out there. And they didn't expect them to last that long. And then they started reducing quality in the 60s because, hey, we need to sell more typewriters. People aren't replacing the ones that they had. And so consequently, we were fortunate that we find so many typewriters from the 50s or before or thereabouts that are built so well. But we are getting to the point now that what happens when the parts do start to wear out? What are we going to do? And typewriters, there's no new parts. Old antique cars, you know, you can build a Model T from scratch, but just the parts catalog. And you can do that with British cars, an MG. They build new body shells for a Mini. And you can build a brand new car basically from parts. But you can't do that with a typewriter. And yes, there are some manual typewriters being made, unfortunately, inferior quality, but they aren't going to last. What do we do when our Olympia or our Royal or our Smith Corona really does need a new part? What are we going to do? Rob it from another typewriter? At some point that will end. And then where do we go from there?
Well, it's only 1 o'clock in the morning or so I guess it's time that we say goodbye for now from one of the first kickoff meetings of the Albuqwerty Type Writer Society. This is Joe Van Cleve and Kevin Kittle saying goodbye for now.